Hey everybody, we are here for week 12 of our Effects on Violin series. We were talking about delay this week. Sorry, couldn't help it. In this series, we hit a different effect each week. We talk about what that effect is, how does it work electronically, where did it come from in the quote real world, what are the parameters, the knobs, the switches, the dials, how do we control that effect, and how do you use it on strings? Sort of the nerdy side of things, as you will. And then most weeks we will have a guest artist who likes to talk about how they use that effect in their art, more the artistic side of things. This week we are talking with my good friend Joe Deninzon. There's a link to that discussion here, and you can hear all the stuff that he likes to talk about with 100 different ways that he uses delay and different types of delay and uses those from an artistic standpoint. I really enjoyed that discussion. I hope you guys will dig it after we're done here. So let's get a quick example of what delay sounds like. So what is delay? It's a naturally occurring phenomenon that is a result of sound traveling in all directions and bouncing off of surfaces, right? So we can see that as the person says hello, it does go straight to the listener, yes, but it also goes in every other direction. And if it hits a reflective surface, it will bounce off that surface and then arrive at the listener in some later point in time. Now, as it bounces, some of that energy is reflected, some of that energy is absorbed, and we will see an exponential decay in the energy of that sound as it arrives at the listener. But those are the exact same things that I said for reverb last week. So are reverb and delay the same? Yes and no. Both are a result of the fact that sound moves very slowly compared to light, and we are able to perceive actually how fast or how slow sound moves in a way that we cannot perceive with light. With reverb, that's what we call when the signals arrive so closely together in time that our ear cannot distinguish those as being separate events. But delay is what we call when they do arrive far enough apart in time that our ear can consider those to be separate and distinct events from one another. And here's an example of the difference between the way reverb sounds and delay sounds. So why do we use these effects? The same as we use reverb to thicken, enrich your tone, to add colors that it didn't have before, to occupy more time and space than it did before. And then to sort of distinguish delay from reverb, why would I use one instead of the other? Well, delay, of course, is going to be more discrete. You're going to hear the physical repeats. And there are reasons that we might want to do that from an artistic standpoint. It can often be less muddy. Sometimes reverb can just occlude things. And I heard somebody describe reverb as reverb hides my mistakes and delay repeats them. So reverb can be a little more sort of covering things up, and delay can be a thing that exposes more what you did. And depending on which one you're trying to do, that might be the one you pick. Or you could use them together, which is what a lot of people do. And here's an example of reverb and delay being used simultaneously together. In fact, if you listen, you can hear that there's reverb and delay in that video. Listen to it again. All right, so there are lots and lots of types of delay out there, but there are sort of three main categories that these fall into. And if you have a multi-effects pedal or if you have an amp that has a couple of different kinds of delay in it, these are very common categories to see: tape, analog, and digital. And let's talk about what those are and what the differences are between them. Tape delay, back in the early days of recording, not super early, they were recording on wax, but later as they started recording on tape, Well, tape moves slowly, just like sound does, and we can route that tape so that when the original signal hits it, it's going to travel some and then hit a playhead, and it will play back something that it recorded maybe a half a second ago or 2 seconds ago or whatever time we select on that. But because tape is a physical thing, every time you record and play on that, the fidelity of the sound degrades. And because there are physical belts and wheels and the tape itself can stretch and move, there's a little bit of an inconsistent sound, what we would call a wow or a flutter. Now, so it's going to change the sound. Each repeat is going to sound a little bit different. That's going to be a similar situation with analog delay. And instead of using tape, it's actually done electronically, recorded into little circuits inside of a pedal or a device. And it's called a bucket brigade circuit, where it records and then plays, and then it passes it off to the next circuit and passes it off to the next circuit and off to the next circuit. And there is going to be some degradation there too. It's different from tape, but it's going to be more of an analog degradation as that analog signal gets passed from circuit to circuit to circuit. Generally, that sort of manifests itself by losing the highs. So it's going to get warmer and darker on each repeat, and your fades are not just from volume, not just that exponential decay, but also the color is getting darker and darker each time. Then came the digital revolution, where we could make a literal exact copy of zeros and ones. There's no degradation. The repeated sound sounds exactly like the original sound. It's just going to be a little bit quieter. So this is a very quick demonstration of sort of the sound differences between tape and analog and digital delay. All right, so if we've chosen which kind of delay, do we want digital, do we want analog, do we want tape? Now we've got that pedal. Now what are the parameters? How do we control that delay? Well, the main ones are time, which is how long, how much space between repeats, how much feedback, which is how many repeats there are, and then the mix, which is how loud those repeats are compared to the original signal. All right, again, a very quick demonstration, but I hope that helps you understand how those parameters work. There is another cool feature that came along a little bit later called tap tempo. So most of the time, it's a knob that you're going to turn that's going to determine how much time it is between repeats. But if you don't always have the ability to sort of dial that in exactly in time with your band until tap tempo comes along. Now you can hear the drummer playing, and you can tap your foot on the pedal in time with that and set that delay. It's going to be a lot more exact than trying to spin a dial and find, oh gosh, is that 400 milliseconds? Is that 420 milliseconds? So that's a really nice feature on some delay pedals. If it has the ability to do a tap tempo, it's really, really helpful. Now, we talked about that there were lots of kinds of delays. We talked about 3 earlier, but there are a whole lot more types of delays than that. There are EQ sweeps, where every time it repeats, an EQ is going to change. So you might hear, okay, I'm not going to do that again. Compression, which is one of those where it's going to squeeze it each time, or it might add distortion in there. We could have pitch shifting, where the repeats actually are affected by a pitch shifter as they come in. There are reverse delays, which was kind of went back to the old tape days. What they would do is that hit, if you had a ka, when it would come back through on the tape, they would run the tape back through backwards. So you hear pow. So yeah, sorry, I'm making all these crazy sounds with my mouth. Let's just listen to them. So where do we put delay in our signal chain? Well, it can go anywhere. You can do whatever you want. But we often put it near the end just because we don't want to be sending these delayed signals through a bunch of other processing, or maybe you do. I don't know, whatever you want. Usually, if we're using delay and reverb together, we would usually put delay first and then reverb. But there are times where you'd want to put reverb first and then delay. I'm going to urge you to just kind of experiment with where you put your delay pedal in your effects chain. Kind of the default is to start with it near the end and then just before reverb, but there might be an artistic reason to put it somewhere else, and that's great. Now, how much reverb do we, how much delay do we want to use? Well, sometimes when you're mixing it together yourself, it might sound like there's a lot of delay in this. You might hear do-da-dee-da-doo, 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 and it might seem like, wow, that's quite a bit. But then when you start playing with your band, you don't really hear it as much. So you're going to have to experiment with balancing. It sounded too much when I was by myself. It wasn't enough when I was playing with my band. We're going to have to it's going to take some experience to get that figured out. Okay? So I hope this has been helpful for you. Hope that this has allowed you to understand what delay is, what some of the parameters are. Be sure to check out my chat with Joe. Be sure to subscribe to our channel. It's going to be over here, Matt. Good job. And then the chat with Joe, and then a bunch of other videos that we've got. We've got a lot of cool videos, and I hope you guys enjoy these.